All my dear children, we are back with the chapter Quadrilateral Construction and Types. Now today let us learn few more types of quadrilaterals. I will start with the easiest one which you already know about. It's a rectangle. So I have drawn a rectangle. Now it's time to name it. I'll name it as A, B, C, D. Clockwise I have named. Now after naming a rectangle, the length or the breadth, I have taken length as 5 and breadth as 3 centimeter. Okay, length 5 centimeter and breadth as 3 centimeter. You can draw rectangle of your choice, any measurements you can take, but only see to it that opposite sides should be congruent. Now when I say only opposite sides congruent, that doesn't define a rectangle. Now this figure, I can't call it as a rectangle until and unless I put the perpendicular sign, that is the 90-degree sign for each angle. If all 4 angles of a quadrilateral are right angle, then it is called as a rectangle. The name rectangle itself speaks up the definition. How will you define a rectangle? A rectangle is a quadrilateral in which all 4 angles are right angle. Okay, you can write in your own words, but see to it that you mention the definition of rectangle as a quadrilateral with all 4 angles right angle is a rectangle. All 4 angles right angle is a rectangle. Okay, right angle, rectangle. Like that you have to remember the definition of rectangle. Whatever we learnt, that is the opposite sides are congruent, that is one of the property of rectangle. Okay children. So next let us talk about the properties. Okay, so the properties what we know are opposite sides of a rectangle are congruent. Yes, that is correct. So you have to write the first property as opposite sides of a rectangle are congruent. Congruent sign I am putting. Now in this figure, how will you show this property? Opposite sides of rectangle are congruent means, now in this figure, which are the opposite sides? Side AB congruent to side CD. Side AD congruent to side BC. Okay. So in this figure, how will you mention the first property? Side AB congruent to side DC. Side AD congruent to side BC. So congruence and this two I'll mark single. Here I'll mark double. Okay. So these two sides congruent and these two sides. These all property we know. But we make a mistake in saying the definition. What is a rectangle if somebody asks you? A quadrilateral whose all 4 angles are right angle is a rectangle. That way you should say. Okay. And these are properties of rectangle. So first property we all know. Let us look into the next property of rectangle. Suppose with scale you can measure the diagonals of this rectangle. With scale, let me measure the diagonal of rectangle. That is from A to C. Measure karke dekho. How much I am getting? Exactly, if I say it is 5.6. Okay. Now, if you measure the next diagonal also I'll measure and check. The second diagonal when I measured, again you can see 5.6. Okay. Between 5.6 and 7. 5.6 only, because here this rectangle I have made with my hand. But then too, we are getting it accurate. So what is the second property that you learned from this? We learned that for a rectangle, the diagonals are congruent. Okay. So you need not by heart. So what is the second property? Diagonals are congruent. Diagonals of rectangle are congruent. Understood? So how will you write that property here? What is the name of the diagonal? Diagonal AC So you'll write diagonal AC congruent to diagonal BD. Fine. AC diagonal congruent to diagonal BD. So this is the second property of rectangle. Okay, if you don't understand and learn, you will get confused because we have just started the first type of quadrilateral rectangle. Now let us talk about the third property of rectangle. After learning two properties of rectangle, now let us move on to the third property. For that, I have drawn the diagonals. Okay, and both the diagonals are intersecting at point O. Now let me measure from point A to O and from point O to C. Let me measure this length and this length. Let me measure and see. Just check, children. From A to O, if I see, measure properly, I'm getting A to O. A to O, I'm getting 2.6. Okay, 2.6 and 7 in between that. Again, from O to C, if I measure, again you are getting 2.6 to 7. So, no, 2.6 or 7 you can consider, or only point difference. Whereas here also, it is 2.7. Okay, same measurement. So, this is also 2.7 centimeter. This part is also 2.7 centimeter. So, what did you see? From A to O, 2.7. From O to C also 2.7. Same way, this diagonal is also getting divided into two equal parts. Two equal parts means what? Which is the other word for equal parts? Two equal parts means bisect. So when I drew the diagonals bisect each other. Okay. This point O is dividing both the diagonals into equal parts. So that is the third property of a rectangle. What will you write? Diagonals of a rectangle bisect each other. Okay, so we saw it. On our own, you can draw a rectangle and find out. Now remember children, 0.1 difference and all you will get because we are not using any geometrical instrument to construct the rectangle. Okay, but with this also we can learn all the properties. So no need to by heart any property. We saw it and we learnt. Which are the three properties? Opposite sides of a rectangle are congruent. Diagonals of a rectangle are congruent. Diagonals of a rectangle bisect each other. How will you write it? By looking at the figure. Diagonals of rectangle bisect each other means you will write segment AO congruent to segment OC. So I'll write therefore segment AO congruent to segment OC. Fine. Okay, same way we can write about the next diagonal also. Segment OD congruent to segment OB. Okay, you can write that. Okay, so we have learnt, we have completed the first type of quadrilateral rectangle. What is a rectangle? A quadrilateral whose all angles are right angle is a rectangle. And these are the properties. Now let us move on to the second type of quadrilateral. Okay children, now let us learn the second type of quadrilateral, square. Okay, so I have drawn a square, roughly I have drawn, not with geometry box. Roughly with scale I have drawn a square and I have marked all the sides congruent. But does this define a square? No. If you want to define a square, you should specify about its angles also. So here you have to mark all the angles 90 degree. Plus, if all the angles are 90 degree, then you can call that quadrilateral as a rectangle. But here there is a speciality. What makes it a square? All the angles are 90 degree and all the sides are equal. All the sides are of equal length. I have taken 4 centimeter length for all the sides. Okay. So how will you define a square? A quadrilateral in which all angles are right angles all sides are of equal length or congruent. Okay, as I told you, in maths there is no hard and fast rule that you have to write only one definition. You can write the definition, in your own words. Okay, maybe in what is given in the textbook, the lines may differ. Okay, but the meaning is the same. What is a square? A quadrilateral in which all angles are 90 degree, all angles are congruent, as well as sides are also congruent. Okay, so what is a square? A quadrilateral in which all angles are right angles and all sides are congruent. You should not say a quadrilateral where all sides are congruent is a square. No, that is incomplete definition. You should also mention about all angles are right angles. I hope you understood. Now time has come for us to learn the properties. The properties of square. If you look into the properties of square, again it's very easy. Okay, so to learn the properties, now again I have drawn diagonals for the square. Now let us measure the diagonals of the square like we did for rectangle. Let's measure the diagonals. The diagonals of the square, roughly if you see, it's coming to be the first diagonal is coming to be 5.5. The second diagonal, if you see, so the second diagonal also you are getting 5.5. Fine. So from this we understood that. What did we understand from this? We understood that first property, diagonals of a square are congruent. Okay, in short I am writing diagonals of a square are congruent. That means diagonal LN congruent to diagonal PM. Diagonals are congruent. Now let me measure from L to Q and Q to N. You draw square and measure and see. You will see that the diagonals are bisecting each other. That means this part is equal to this part. Okay, and this part is equal to the other part. So diagonals of a square bisect each other. Both these properties are same for rectangle and square. Okay, so like that you can correlate and learn. Diagonals of a square are congruent. Diagonals of rectangle are also congruent. Diagonals of square bisect each other. Diagonals of rectangle also bisect each other. Now let us see the third property, which is a hatke property, a different property from the rectangle. So for that I need a protractor. Now I am taking protractor and I will measure each angle which is formed. That is this angle. Okay, this angle, this angle, this and this angle. So for that I'll keep the protractor this way. So you have to remember, see Raji Miss had used a protractor for square. So I kept it this way. Magic. Just see. These two angles both are getting divided into 90 degree here, 90 degree there. That means I can put the perpendicular sign here. Both are 90 degree. Same way, if I measure down, just see, yes. Again here also they are 90 degree. Okay, so one perpendicular sign is enough to understand that all four angles here are 90 degree. So how will you put it in words? Diagonals of a square are perpendicular bisectors of each other. They are dividing the diagonal into two equal parts, and those diagonals when they are divided, four 90 degree angles are formed. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 90 degree angles are formed. So what is the third property? Diagonals of a square are perpendicular bisectors of each other. Okay. Now here I have already written bisect each other. So here if you write only diagonals of a square are perpendicular to each other, that also is correct. Already they are bisecting, already diagonal को equal parts में divide कर रहा है, उसके ऊपर the angles are also perpendicular. So diagonals are dividing each other into equal perpendicular angles. So this point also I included here and I wrote diagonals of a square are perpendicular. This is a symbol for 90 degree. Perpendicular bisectors of each other. You can write diagonals of square are perpendicular to each other. But I tell you, you always write this as the reason. So this reason will include this also. So no need to write two different reasons. One reason you can write. Okay, so remember the third property of square. Now we will go on to the last property of square. For that again we need a protractor. Let us see. Now this whole thing is 90 degree. No, this angle is 90, this angle is 90, this angle is 90. If you see, this diagonal is dividing angle P into equal parts. The diagonal PM is dividing angle P into equal parts. So if you see, the diagonals are bisecting the opposite angle. 45 you are getting, this angle will be 45 and this angle will also be 45 degree. 45 degree plus 45 degree is 90 degree. Okay. So what is the fourth property that you saw? The diagonals of a square bisect the opposite angle. That means, what is the meaning of it is, if you have a square, separately I will draw and show you. If you have a square and this is first diagonal. This diagonal is dividing, suppose the name of the square is ABCD. The first diagonal AC is dividing the opposite angles A and C into equal parts. So this will be 45, this will be 45. Same way, this is 45, this is 45. So that is the last property. This property we use mostly in 10th standard. Okay. Most of the sums they don't ask from the fourth property. But we will keep it in mind. What is that property? Diagonals of a square bisect the opposite angles. Opposite angles ko they divide into equal parts. That is 45 degree, 45 degree. 90 is if you divide into 2, 45, 45 you will get, no? So this will be 45, this will be 45. Same way, this much will be 45, this much will be 45. Understood? So these are the properties of square. So now we have learnt about properties of rectangle and properties of square. You should remember the definition thoroughly. Now let us start with the fourth type of quadrilateral, a rhombus. Okay, today's attraction is this rhombus. What is a rhombus? Rhombus is a confusion. Okay, if I say rhombus is a confusion. But how can you make it simplified? Listen to me carefully. If a quadrilateral has all sides congruent, then it is called as a rhombus. Are you confused? If all sides of a quadrilateral are congruent, then we can call it as a rhombus. So maybe few of you may be thinking, then can this be called as a square? No. That is why we learnt the definition of square, no? What is a square? A square has all sides of equal length and all angles 90 degree. Can you see 90 degree here? Is this 90 degree? Okay, just look at the angle. This angle is obtuse angle, no? Look at this angle. See, mouth is closed. So this angle is acute angle. Same way, this angle is acute angle and this angle is obtuse angle. Understood the difference between rhombus and square? Okay. So how will you eliminate the confusion? In a square, all sides are congruent and all angles are 90 degree. In a rhombus, only all sides are congruent. All angles are not congruent. You can see here that the opposite angles are obtuse angles. Yes. So from this you got one property of rhombus also. That is, the opposite angles of a rhombus are congruent. See, this opposite angle and this opposite angle are obtuse angle and they are of equal measure. This opposite angle and this opposite angle are acute angles and they are of equal measure. So let us learn the definition. What is the definition of rhombus? If all sides of a quadrilateral are congruent, if all sides of a quadrilateral are congruent, then it is called as a rhombus. Then it is called as a rhombus. If all sides of a quadrilateral are congruent, then it is called as a rhombus. So this is the definition of rhombus. Now I already told you one property. What is that? That the opposite angles are congruent. Let me measure and check. Please see. This angle is coming to be 70 degree. So let me measure the opposite angle now here. Just check. I'll keep the protractor this way. Okay, this we got 70 degree. Opposite angle is here. Just check. 70. So this is also 70 degree. Same way, these two angles will be, let me measure how much is this angle. 110. Now obtuse, so you will look up 110 degree. This will also be 110. 110 here and 110 here. Okay. Again, it is coming correctly, all the angles if you add, it should be 360. 110 plus 110 is 220. 220 plus 70 is 290. 290 plus 70 is 360. So total we are getting 360 degree. Understood? So what is the first property of rhombus? Properties of rhombus. First property is opposite angles in a rhombus are congruent. Opposite angles in a rhombus are congruent. Now let us learn the next property of rhombus. So as you can see, I have drawn diagonals for the rhombus and same like square. Now this diagonal of rhombus, they will also divide the opposite angle into two equal parts. That is, this will be 35, 35. 35, 35. 110, half will be 55, 55. Understood? So the second property of rhombus is diagonals bisect the opposite angles in a rhombus. Diagonals bisect the opposite angles. The third property of rhombus is diagonals bisect each other and are perpendicular to each other. As you can see, if you measure the length of the, let us take the diagonals intersecting at point O. If you measure from W to O and from O to Y, it will be of equal measure. That is, if I measure, it is coming to be 3 centimeter and this part will also be 3 centimeter. So 3 here, 3 centimeter here and 3 centimeter here. So double mark I'll use because single already I have used. Okay, so as you saw, the diagonals bisect each other. And also these angles which are formed are all 90 degree, 90 degree. So how will you write? Together, diagonals bisect each other. एक दूसरे को equally divide करता है. Diagonals bisect each other and are perpendicular to each other. Okay, so these are the three properties of rhombus. Okay, children, so what we have learnt today? We learnt the correct definitions of square, rectangle and rhombus. Also the properties of the same. Now you have to draw all these figures in your book and write down the properties neatly in full sentence. Here I have used the symbol, you have to write congruent, okay. Diagonals have used short form, you write the complete word. Okay, so in this way, learn the properties of each quadrilateral and be prepared for the practice set. So I hope you all have understood the properties of these quadrilaterals. Learn it well and we will solve the practice set. Thank you.